My name's Dan McCollum. I'm an education nerd over here at MCG in Augusta, and wanted to start a sort of education series as a service through GCEP about how to get lecturers rolling, how to improve the quality of our lecturers, as well as kind of get us more on like the regional and national stage. Because then there's so many amazing educators at so many shops across our state, and I want to sort of kind of get that first step going. Okay, so this is the first of the educational master classes called Start with Why. So we're going to be talking about how to design lectures that educate, entertain, and make a difference. So this is more of a high level talk, not so much like the slideology of this is the way this one slide ought to look, and a lot more about what should you be thinking about accomplishing by doing a lecture in general. Okay. I got no conflicts of interest. I try to give away as much of my money as I can. Um, See how that goes with my wife. So, to summarize up front, number one, you got to clarify your intent prior to starting your lecture prep, not after. Way too often, you start building a lecture and then figure out what you're trying to do while you're messing with the slides. Really bad idea. You need to aim to inspire the learner rather than completely educate them all at once. Because most of the time in a short lecture, you're doing the first step, but someone's going to have to do more steps to actually apply that to the bedside. Avoid doomed lecture styles that are setting you up for failure where people just aren't going to be engaged enough. Tailor the lecture to what the audience needs, not towards what you want to give them or what's the most fun for you as the presenter. And we'll talk about how to get your foot in the door, how to get started, how to double dip so you can be as productive as possible and get credit for the hard work that you're doing. All right, so first off, this was called a master class, and it was not my idea. I do not have the ego that it takes to actually call anything that I ever do a master class. This was from the GCEP president, Shami Das, and he insisted there was a better title of calling it a master class. So I'm sorry, but that is not my idea. I do not have a big enough ego for that. There's many styles about how to lecture. I've got my distinct style. A lot of people have other styles that work for them, and that's awesome. But I don't want this to view as like, oh, Dan McCollum's got all the answers for lecturing because I frankly don't. But I want this to be a collaboration with other educators across the state. So if other people have other thoughts, they disagree with me, that's awesome because there's many ways to do this right. I'm going to talk about what I feel more strongly about, which are the ways to do it wrong, where I can be more clear of like, this is definitely not how to do it, but there's a lot of ways to get the job done. So first off, I want to ask, like, why are you lecturing? What's the point of it? So why give a lecture at all as opposed to using something else? Why is it that you should be doing the lecture and not someone else? Is there someone else that knows more about it? Is there someone else that is more engaging? Why are you doing this topic instead of something else? One of the biggest failures is if you're really, really excited about, ultrasound and someone says, hey, you got to give the GI bleed topic, and you're like, I don't care about GI bleeds at all. You're probably the wrong person for the job. And does it need to be a lecture? Should it be a book chapter or someone should read a review article about this? Is it right to be doing this as an in-person or Zoom lecture? Should it be a podcast? Should it be a video? Is there another medium that would make more sense for this? And I really want you to ask, like, what are your motivations? Like, why are you doing a lecture? Is it because you were assigned to as part of your job, and whether you like it or not, you just got to get through it? Which, okay, like just own it. It's fine that you're just trying to achieve this educational activity because you need to. But if you're really passionate about it, if you're really trying to change like clinical practice or like how people actually do what they do, it's going to be more easy to get motivated as opposed to, yeah, I got to give the syncope lecture even though I hate it. Check the box, right? But you can be honest about that, and that can sort of motivate like how you're going to accomplish it. Ross Fisher has an amazing model about how to give lectures. He calls it P cubed. So P1 is the message. So this is what you're actually trying to convey. P2 is the supportive media. That could be slides, that could be video, that could be a chalkboard, whatever. And then P3 is delivery, how you actually convey what it is that you've got, the message, as well as the media that you use to support it. Okay, so this is an amazing website with an absolutely horrible name. So P Cubed Presentations, if you just type that into Google, will get the job done. Or you can try this awful URL. It's ffoliate, FFOLLIET.com. It is probably the best website with the worst URL I've ever seen. But it's got lots and lots of information about how you can sort of apply these ideas of how to make more dynamic presentations and be a lot better as an educator. So it's funny that I say educator because really I'm more of an inspirator, I guess, because you're going to be more inspirational than educational in the vast majority of lectures that you give. You can inspire the learner while you're talking to them for a half hour to take the next steps and to do more. But it's rare that the educational process is actually complete. for many reasons. One is details just get lost. I can tell you, hey, this is the dose for this antibiotic. It's very unlikely you're going to remember it. I can show you a cool ultrasound trick or something like that, but it's unlikely until you actually get to applying that at the bedside. And that change actually requires repetition. So it's not going to be something of, yep, I rocked your world with this half-hour lecture on how to lecturing, and now you're just a totally different presenter. As much as I can kind of give you the tools or inspire you to make those next steps, but it's really only by doing that you're actually going to apply this and get better. And I really think that that requires for us to view us as people that are unique and individual. Like, what do I add over AI? As an education nerd, my ability to say, hey, let me knock your socks off with a syncope PowerPoint slide set is actually kind of diminishing. AI is getting very quick about this. Open evidence is super smart. If all you're doing is saying, hey, here's the admission criteria for syncope, you could largely crank that into open evidence and get a pretty decent answer much of the time. But if you add your uniqueness, here's the special stories I've got, here's how I evolved my practice, here's something that is my unique style to engage the audience. That's your special uniqueness that is not going to be replicated for some time. All right, so I mentioned before, I'm not arrogant about my way is the right way to lecture, but I can tell you some ways not to lecture because I think that's much more clear. And if you find yourself following these habits, like check yourself. So one is what I call the textbook chapter. Distressingly, it's one of the most common lectures assigned to educators, saying, hey, I want you to take a chapter of Rosen's or Tintinalli's and just tell me all about GI bleeds for an hour. Those are almost always awful. Even if you're a really good lecturer with a great slide set, it's just very difficult to cover a huge, broad area. And frankly, someone could probably read a textbook chapter in the same time period and learn more. Another is what I call the reference sheet, where you just have so much data and graphs and numbers falling all over the place. It's just zipping right past the audience. A slide set is not the way to convey that kind of detailed information. Another is the comedy hour, where there's very little educational meat there. It's all about just me being the presenter and having a good time, pretending to be a stand-up comedian. That almost always fails. And then last but not least is something for everyone, where your audience is so broad that you can't focus it down to where you're serving anybody. You're just kind of spamming out information that sometimes is useful for the med student and sometimes is only for the attendings. That really doesn't work super well. So this lecture is just chucking textbooks out in the audience, and that's what I think about every time I see someone says, "Hey, chapter 142 of Rosen's, let's talk about PE," and they basically just rehash it. And these lectures are always murder. I mean, I've given a few of them myself. They're just so bad. It's far better to focus on a narrow area. So not just like upper GI bleed or lower GI bleed, but let's talk about the critically ill upper GI bleeder that you're getting ready to intubate. Like, what are all the nuances there? That gets exciting, okay? Or what about the lower GI bleeds that you can safely send home? Okay, let's go into that, right? It doesn't always have to be sicker and sicker. It's just the more specific you are, the more engaging it's going to be, and the more excited your audience is going to be. You should also think about a specific level of skill. Okay, and we'll talk about this more about the don't be something for everyone. But are you talking to experts? Are you talking to new med students? Is it an overwhelmed intern? What level of skill should you tailor your audience to? Okay, if you ever have to give a basic lecture, okay, the program director says, look, it's got to be on GI bleeds, it's got to be the basics, and you say, okay, aye, Captain, let's do this. I strongly encourage you to just turn that into a vignette-based lecture. So instead of trying to go through Rosen's and just, block by block, just do it. Instead, just tell a series of vignettes and let that pull them along so that they're actually getting the information you have. It's still probably not as good as if you tailor down that topic to something specific, but it'll be a lot more worthwhile than if you just try to rehash a chapter. Next up is the reference sheet, where someone is just all about the data, and I'm a data nerd myself, so I've definitely been guilty of this. The problem is just specifics get lost, right? These, individual statistics and the exact dosing of meds, like nobody can remember that. And so how many people have had a lecturer say, I apologize for this slide because I know that you can't read it. The numbers are too small. You're like, why do you have this slide up there? Don't apologize for it. Just don't include it. So you don't want to distract with small type or overwhelming them with data. Now, if you've got something where it's really, really specific, you've got some take-home points that are numeric in nature, something like that, it's awesome to have a handout. Now, every conference I go to, people are like, hey, take my slides, and we'll just put them up on a website. And my goal is to mostly make my slides useless to audience. If they rehash them, they might vaguely remember what I say, but I don't want so much data on my slides that's actually a super useful tool for them. It's far better to make a separate handout, right? So if I'm giving a lecture on vasopressors, well, here's a few vasopressors I like to use, and here's the dosing ranges that make sense. That would actually be great as a handout. And you could do this with, good old-fashioned paper dead tree editions of just here's some printed out sheets. QR codes or making a website are also really smart as well, but it should actually be different than your slide set. When people try to make their slides hold a huge amount of data, it's something called a slidegument, which is a smash up of slide and document. And that kind of fails in both directions. It's both not a good slide set because it's got too much detail on it, but it's not a good document because it's got all this extra stuff. No one needs to see my lecture title slide on their reference sheet. They just want to know the dosing of the vasopressors. So it fails on both sides. And so it's better if you've got a really technical talk, you got an ultrasound lecture on the gallbladder and you really want people to memorize certain millimeters because it's important to understand it, well, that's fine. But you probably want to make a separate reference for someone to actually store on their phone or something like that. Next up, you got the comedy hour. This poor lecturer is getting some tomatoes tossed at him. And the main reason this fails, it's not about you as the lecturer. It's not about me having a good time talking in front of people. True story, I actually have stage fright. And so like even though I've lectured a ton of times, like I actually don't enjoy it that much because I'm scared of audiences. But it's not about me. And it shouldn't be about telling jokes just because I can. It's got to serve the lecture. And if it doesn't, that joke, no matter how devastatingly funny you think it is, needs to go. You frankly are not Dave Chappelle, and lectures are not the most fun way to spend your day. I hope that you guys get something out of this session, but I'm not pretending like this is the most enjoyable highlight of your day, okay? Like it's just not going to be that much fun, or else you'd be doing something other than watching a medical lecture. So, sort of keep the comedians at bay, just let them do their own thing and you do yours. It's great to inject some of your personality. If you're a funny person, you like to joke around, cool, throw some jokes in there, but make sure that it serves the message and isn't just like, oh, here's some random New Yorker cartoon I'm just going to put in slide 18. That is not a good idea and it pulls them out of the message that you've got. The last doomed lecture that I'm going to talk about is the something for everyone. So here we've got little baby doctors, experienced gray hairs, and everyone in between. Baselines differ, and it just isn't going to work if you try to serve all masters. You can inspire every single person that's there. And I've been there when I've watched like basic lectures on core content. I'm like, man, this person's really delivering some great core content on congestive heart failure. It inspires me to be a little bit better, right? Even if I didn't learn anything new. But it's important to know that you're not going to be able to really drop a lot of educational knowledge on each and every person that's there if you're lecturing to a broad audience. You're either going to lose the medical students or going to bore the attendings one way or the other. But I like to err on the side of giving a little bit of extra information because those that are more junior and more novice can step up as long as you make your message clear enough to where they can be like, hey, I don't really know what they're talking about with heart strain and PE, but I'm going to learn more about that because they made their message clear enough. But one size definitely does not fit all. So let's say that you're like me and you say, oh man, I have definitely made every single one of those Doom lecture styles in the past. How can I spice up my old lectures instead of just making brand new ones? Well, the easiest, and I think most important take home on that is just to add a bunch of vignettes. We love a story. And so it's much more interesting to actually think about a specific GI bleed patient that I've had, either real or fictitious, and actually work through the case than just talking about the pathophysiology of, well, the diverticula do this, and the stomach does it. Like that's murder, as opposed to actually telling the story. Another way to get involvement is actually just turn it into a quiz. So I've seen many people who are like, I don't really like to lecture. Let me just do either a Kahoot style quiz or a Jeopardy quiz. And that's actually a very effective way to teach people because it automatically gets engagement from the audience. You can also inject some conflict or debate. So if I'm like the pros and cons of, interventions for submassive PE, that kind of gives a little bit of tension there. And so that actually makes it a much more engaging topic than me just saying, well, I know the one true answer about how to approach submassive PE and leave it at that. And last but not least, this is something to Google if you're not familiar with it. There's something called the hero's journey narrative about like how something came to be. This is great if you're saying like I'm going to do the history of sepsis or here's my evolution of how I've been as an airway operator of, I used to intubate like this and here's when I added this and here's when I did that. That actually is a really way to like pull someone along as you're introducing educational content in a way that just hooks them. So before you get going, you need to know who your audience is, not just in a broad way, but I want to know my specific target audience. And I like to think of like an archetypal person that I'm lecturing to. I like to think of a specific intern in mind of like, I'm going to do a GI bleed lecture and I'm wanting to focus this on Sam because she is just a really bright intern, but hasn't seen a lot of GI bleeds. How should we do that? Okay. And that really helps you target your lecture so that you're serving somebody. And if it doesn't serve that audience, you say, hey, cut it. That's too much or that's too little. You also need to think about the practice site. If I'm lecturing a bunch of paramedics about how to do CPR, well, they're actually practicing in a different location. When I'm doing CPR, it's almost always in a resus bay. When they're doing it, it's almost always on the side of the road. So it's a little bit of a different site, and that can affect how you're going to approach it. I'd like to separate training and experience level. You can be really, really experienced, but maybe not have a lot of formal training. So maybe you're a family med doc that's been doing 20 years of work in the emergency department, but you actually didn't have like a lot of the lecture background that someone might have. It's a brand new EM boarded attending that's only a couple years out. So it's very different, and you need to sort of separate like what's the formal training versus how experienced are you in that subject. But keep in mind, the value of the lecture is from the audience, not the presenter. I could give a devastatingly amazing lecture, deliver it perfectly with, just chef's kiss slides, and it doesn't matter if that doesn't serve what my audience needs. So you need to ask, what does this audience need? Not what do I want to give as a lecture, because those are two very different things. Okay? Two big groups that you're going to be talking to is going to be the advanced groups versus the more novice groups. If you've got an advanced audience, I say shoot for the moon. You can give very detailed lectures if they're within the tribe. If they are an experienced group of emergency physicians, like I'm talking to attendings or I'm doing fellows, if I'm giving like a lecture to some fellows that know about this topic, you want to pull people up, give them the late breaking information, let them know the detail, appreciate the nuance. If you got to do a recap, it's got to be fast. Okay, I give a Code Blue CPR drug lecture where I talk about the evidence basis for all the different drugs that are given during CPR commonly, right? But I say, hey, listen, before I even talk about drugs, compressions and shocks are what save lives. The drugs are all debatable, but those two things are not. And so I stress that. And I'll actually say it more than once because that's such a key basic recap before I go into the weeds of all the drugs. So that kind of thing is fine to an advanced audience, but you don't want to dwell forever on just super basic core content or you lose them. And pathophysiology rarely matters. This hurts for me because I actually love pathophysiology, but it's often the case that you do not have enough time to really explain the whys of something. You're just going to tell them something. And if they want that, then they can go to some of the resources that you give them. So if they're inside your tribe, they're already in the know, they're already practicing the sum, especially like an advanced audience on this topic, give them extra information when they're inside the tribe. Let's say that you're talking to novices, right? And this could be a lot of different forms, okay? These could be attendings, but not routinely see it. If I'm doing a lecture on hemorrhage control to a bunch of family medicine doctors, quite a few of them are going to be relatively novice on the use of tourniquets. And that's okay. That's not a knock on them. It's just that they don't deal with that a lot. So it's okay to have a novice audience on that front. I could be lecturing to paramedics about EKGs, and some of the paramedics might be incredibly sharp on EKGs. So don't confuse that level of training for mastery of a topic. But if you have a novice audience or new to this topic, there's zero benefit if they're lost. And I've seen this happen where someone's lecturing to the interns and they go way off the deep end, like right heart physiology or diastology, things like that. And they're just losing their audience. So they have zero benefit if they're lost. So you have to stress the essentials over and over again. A slight overstatement that I'm making here is that pathophysiology never matters to novices. It's only when you get advanced does it really matter for you to understand that deeper question of why. But because a novice audience is, again, not homogenous, you want to give extra resources for those that are motivated, they're inspired by your talk, and they want to go further, go for it. So if it's outside the tribe, if you're not talking to a group that deals in this subject all the time, keep it simple because you've got to build that good foundation before you go advanced. Before I go further, do we have any questions from anyone about what we've covered so far? Awesome. Either I'm doing a great job or I've already put you all to sleep. So, next up, we're going to talk about the format. So, this lecture is done in PowerPoint, and I hate PowerPoint, and it's all that I use, and I'll explain it why in a minute. Okay. You could use other slide software like Canva or Keynote, and that's cool. Both of those are probably better pieces of software. You could change it to a quiz format, right? Kahoot is one brand that makes that really easy. I like that a lot, but there's many other ways. If you're feeling really fancy, you can do like an old chalkboard style talk or whiteboard talk. I would encourage you to make this a digital whiteboard as opposed to actually being in front of a room with markers on a white dry erase board. Unless the lighting is amazing and your audience is very small, they cannot read what you write. But if you're able to pull this off, it's a pretty advanced move. It is an amazing lecture. You can also choose, instead of it just being you up there monologuing with some slides, you could turn it into a debate or a panel. Invite someone that disagrees with you, or invite a couple of friends, and y'all can just talk about how you approach things. That's often very engaging. Flipped classroom is something that I love in theory and it just doesn't work out well. We'll talk more about that in a second, about my opinions on that. And then last but not least, I have to mention Prezi as a format issue. Prezi makes some really cool looking slide sets where you zoom around and you move back and forth. There's a couple of problems with that. One, the transitions frankly distract from your message because they get distracted by things swooping around, which is why essentially all of my transitions are very minimalistic. There's just nothing, it's just slide to slide because I don't want you to be distracted by things swooping in and taking over. And there's a significant chunk of the group that will actually get motion sick if they're watching a Prezi presentation. So I really don't like Prezi much at all. Compatibility and reliability trump coolness. And what I mean by that is your lecture absolutely has to work. We've all been there when someone comes in and they got some super sweet lecture that they did on us on another piece of software and they can't make it work for the first 10 minutes of their lecture. So their half-hour lecture, the first 10 minutes of them is wrestling with the computer at the podium. I hate PowerPoint. It is not the best piece of software at all, but better or worse, it is the industry standard. You will never go to a lecture unless it's something really unique where they don't have the ability to handle your PowerPoint. So I don't like PowerPoint, but it is what I use to create all my lectures now, and it's what I'm going to teach you guys to use on future lectures if you guys are interested in some slideology stuff. Let's talk about flipped classroom. In many ways, this is ideal, right? The idea that I would give you some extra material for you to learn. You don't have to listen to me banter on about the basics of asthma. You would consume that on your own, in your own time, in your own way. And then you would come and then we would actually engage on that content. It sounds great, but there's some problems with the flipped classroom. One is control and motivation. So if you're the program director and you can actually enforce that all of your residents actually consume all that material because there's a quiz afterwards, okay, you might actually be able to control your audience. But most of the time, your audience is essentially voluntary. They don't have to really engage. They can just be there and nod their head and doze off, right? You also have varying degrees of motivation as well as time constraints. So adding yet another chore to a resident's busy workload is a problem. And the problem, if you really leverage the flipped classroom concept, is your slides really shouldn't work that well if they don't do their homework. Or else, why did you bother doing a flipped classroom, right? So if your lecture is busted, if they don't do the pre-work, and you know that half the audience is not going to do your pre-work, you're in trouble. The extra work for both you as a presenter, because you have to curate that extra material for them to review in advance, and it's obviously extra work for the audience as well, because they got to do stuff before they even show up. I find that just injecting a lot of vignettes into my lectures accomplishes a lot of the things that we're trying to get done with the flipped classroom without problems. We'll talk more about that later. So once you've decided on your lecture topic, you got to tailor it. So you're going to focus it down. You're going to think about your audience, exactly who you're talking to. And in the time slot that you're given, you're going to practice so that you're only using up 75% of the time that you're out. That's how I practiced this particular lecture, is I figured out how long I want to talk, and then I practiced so that I could get it down to 75% of that time. Reason being is audiences never complain when they get let out a few minutes early, or if you have extra time for Q&A afterwards, or if you just need some time to let your lecture breathe because you're not trying to say so many words really, really quickly, something I am very prone to doing, and I'm probably doing now. The other part is you have to have passion for your topic. If you don't have passion for your topic, you need to either modify it in some ways where you're excited about it, or just be honest with the conference organizer and say, like, listen, I really don't care about syncope. I'm not going to be the person for you to give this lecture. Assign me something else and I'll do a better job. But you should never, ever give a lecture that you aren't excited about. Conference organizers want to hear from you up front, not wait for you to turn in the world's worst syncope lecture and then try to correct it after the fact. And a key way to get this accomplished is by focusing down. You want to be using a sniper rifle, not a shotgun, okay? If it's too broad, it's a textbook chapter. So if you get it focused down, that's where passion shines through. Even if you care a lot about pulmonary embolism, you probably care more about subsets of it, and you could talk more passionately about the ones you get to send home, or the submassive controversies, or how do you take care of the massive ones. Those are all much more dynamic and interesting topics than just saying, here's everything in the world to know about PE in a half hour, which really can't be done. Again, anyone got any questions at all? I want this to be a dialogue, so I'll give a little bit of a longer pause here.
No questions, but enjoying it so far. Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Catherine. I'm glad that at least one person is awake. I hope the
Still
others are
here.
too. All right. So let's say that you drank the Kool-Aid, you're loving what I'm throwing down. You're like, hey, how do I get going on this? I really want to like lecture more. So one is the idea of low risk practice because you just got to get out there and do it some. But you don't have to start at like big regional lectures or like that. You can actually do some local grand rounds, talk to your local residencies. One of my favorite groups to talk to are the emergency medicine interest groups that you can find out there. They're so eager for any topic. And to be honest, because they're so novice and they just soak up knowledge like a sponge, they're really engaged, but they're unlikely to like bust you with a really hard question or something like that. I spent hundreds of hours lecturing interns with a lecture series that I just frankly made up. Very few program directors are going to turn down the offer of a faculty member just saying, hey, I'll give a half hour lecture on core content to the interns, and it's voluntary. Like no one turns that away. Okay. And so it's a great way to just get some reps of talking to small groups of people, understanding your speaking style. Okay. And you can actually get a lot done that way. You can also give talks to other specialties. So I keep mentioning family medicine because they often have a lot of conferences. There's a lot of family med and internal med docs that want to know about things that we deal with a lot. And so it's great to actually talk with them. It's curiously really, really challenging to give a really high-end lecture to another specialty, but it's actually really approachable if it's a topic that you already know a lot about. So if you already know a lot about EKGs, it's going to be very comfortable, like home ground for you if you're actually lecturing to a group that doesn't deal as much with EKGs, which is really nice. Now, you got to get found, right? So it's not just about like, oh, I want to do it. I'm making these great lectures. Well, how do I get on the regional circuit? And we're going to be talking about how to do that. A really exciting initiative, the amazing Liz Olson has actually helped me develop a Google Sheets form that will let you sign up so that we can actually send out your information to conference organizers. So we're going to be making a Georgia emergency medicine educator database. The idea is that if you just say, hey, this is me, this is my contact information, these are the topics I like to lecture on, keep me in mind the next time that you do a grand rounds or a regional conference or whatever. And by sending that out to conference organizers, we're going to make it an easy mode button for them to actually get a hold of you, as well as actually get our people engaged more. By doing local service, by lecturing to those interns, by talking to those EMIG kids, things like that, you're going to get a lot of practice. And then you can start cold calling other groups. So you can say, hey, what do you need? Like, is there a subject that you need covered? I love your conference, but like, is there something that you don't have that you need? And conference organizers say, yeah, we really need a syncope lecture, but we don't have anyone that signed up for that yet. You're going to be a great candidate if you ask for it. A huge mistake that I made is I sort of lecture on whatever. I don't have a real niche or pattern. I really strongly recommend that you don't do that because you have to read way too much if you do that. It's far easier for you to find that passion. So, do you really care about PZM or cardiology or something like that? It is a lot easier to be like an Amal Mattu, where all of his lectures are related to cardiology essentially, and he's just that guy. It's easier to sort of keep that tight as opposed to being a hitter that goes for everything. Early on in your career, you might not be sure what you're most passionate about. It's okay to explore the space a little bit, but it's way easier to find a niche. I'm going to practice what I preach and not give you too many details about that educational database until we send it off in email. Okay. But that's coming soon. Okay. And I'm going to show you guys how to do it. So I'm going to make sure that if you haven't already, go ahead and put your email in the comment section. So I have a direct way to specifically address it to you. But we're going to be emailing about how to sign up for this database and what that's going to look like shortly. Next up, short is good. The longest lectures I like to give are 30 minutes max. If someone says, hey, it's got to be an hour long block because that's the space that I got to fill, I'm going to tell the conference organizer, well, okay, even if you insist that I lecture on GI bleeds for an hour, I'm going to do two or three short talks in the genre of GI bleed. But each one of those individual lectures is going to stand on its own. That's a lot more dynamic, and it's a great way to fill that time as opposed to going into like the textbook chapter style thing of here's everything that you've ever wanted to know about STEMIs in an hour. That doesn't work as well. You can also do what I call the fake flipped classroom. So this is where, I said before, I don't know if you did your homework before coming in. If I have to do an hour-long block, or even if I'm doing a 30 minutes and doing it quick, I might spend the first half of that giving people the knowledge, right? So it's like the pre-reading for a flipped classroom, and then spend the second half in something dynamic, either running through cases or doing Q&A or discussing how to apply it in some way. That is actually much more dynamic, and I think it solves some of the problems with flipped classrooms. This will help you get your foot in the door, okay? If you do a great job and present well, you're going to get invited to the same conferences over and over again. And if you start doing that again and again, people start noticing it. Wow, Catherine's here every year at this particular conference. That's awesome because you're going to develop a reputation. And I really want to say, don't just deliver great education to the audience, but make sure that you're making the conference organizer's life easy. Emily Kiernan is an amazing toxicologist. She may not be actually on the Zoom call, but every time I organize a rural conference, it is a very easy thing for me to say, hey, they always ask for talks. I'm going to give Emily a call. Done. I don't have to worry about it. Her slides are always on time. She always does a great job. And so I don't have to worry about it. And that means me as a conference organizer, I can focus on the two or three new lecturers or the topics that I don't think are going to work as well. I can focus my attention on those because Emily's got it in the bag, right? That's how you keep getting invited again and again to these conferences. And once you give a lecture, I want you to double dip. You probably spent dozens of hours preparing for this lecture, making slides, things like that. Double dip by using what you've done to new audiences. So you can give essentially the same lecture at a different conference than what you've done here, okay? Or tailor it to other audiences. So maybe you simplify it or expand it. We'll talk about that more in a second. You could record yourself giving that lecture and load it up to YouTube, surprisingly easy with slide recording software. You could turn it into an academic paper or publication. Or maybe you don't really need the slides and you could actually do a podcast on this. We'll talk how to tailor that as well. One important thing, if you're going to do this where you're double dipping and you're going to other conferences or you're trying to post it to YouTube, is consider copyright. Every single image for this entire lecture was AI generated because there's not going to be a copyright associated with it. If I actually start using other people's, cartoons or things like that, then I actually run into a problem. If I put it on YouTube, I could have a problem. Okay. So it's far safer, in my opinion, to just go ahead and plan in advance that you don't want to get into trouble with copyright. And that way I can post it to YouTube. I can do whatever I want because it's all my creation. Once you're trying to double dip with this, make sure that you tailor it. So you might simplify an advanced topic down to something simpler for a more novice group, or expand it because maybe you're targeting a more elite group. You could take your echo lecture, and if I'm going to be giving that to ultrasound fellows, I'm going to have to add a lot to it to make it more expansive. Consider the medium. This is Zoom, and I fully get it that we're half hour into a lecture on Zoom, but you got to be punchy. You got to move. You got to exaggerate what you're doing in a way that you probably wouldn't have to do if you were in person because it comes through a little bit more. But you got to be a little over the top for Zoom. If you're doing a podcast, you're probably going to have to edit it way down. So you're either going to cut down a lot of your content so it can be shorter, around 15 minutes, or split it into multiple podcasts where you're going to do a part one, a part two, a part three, something like that. Okay. So if you're still hanging in there with me, here's the next steps. Here's the things, the call to action, the things that I want you to do from here. Find an old lecture and the stuff that we talked about today, modify it in some way to where you're actually injecting more narrative, spicing it up, considering your audience. So either tailor it to a specific group of people, something like that. We're going to send out information about the database, and I'm happy to do that in the Q&A session as well if you have more questions about what that looks like. But that's going to help get you found so you can get your foot in the door. Ask a local group, but hey, can I lecture? Find out, does the program director need someone to talk to interns? Or is there a medical student group that is motivated? And ask to lecture to those novices, because it's honestly one of my favorite groups to lecture to. They're often really hungry, and it's often a little bit easier because it's core knowledge for you, and you can just lecture about, hey, here's how I practice. It's a little bit of a lighter lift. So again, practicing what I preach, I don't think that I'm going to give you everything that you need on lecture design just in this one talk, but I can inspire you to do some further reading. The first place I would turn would be P Cubed Presentation. That's Ross Fisher's site. It's excellent. Don't try to type in F Foliate. I still don't know how to spell it, even though it's a great, great website. It's going to give you a lot of tips on speaking. Scott Weingart's got a great talk called PowerPoint and Meth, talking about how to actually give a lecture. Some of that gets a little bit more into slideology, as does Presentation Zen, which is my favorite book on how to give lectures and how to think about the act of lecturing. That's by Gar. Is an excellent book to sort of discuss how it's really more about your message and not leveraging so much slides with lots and lots of words. Now, this is masterclass number one. Shami, I'll never forgive you for making me call it a masterclass. But the next lectures we're going to talk is number two is going to be slides, talking about how to make dynamic slides that you can use, how to generate your own images, how to make things that look attractive. Then we're going to be talking about presentation skills. So how do you actually deliver said message? And then how do we modify this to other formats? Like if you're going to be getting into podcasting, if you're trying to do Zoom talks, how does that differ than in person? What do small group sessions look like differently than big lecture halls? And then frankly, it's anything you guys want, because a big goal of this initial set was to say, hey, I don't want to lecture just because this is what I know. I want to know what it is that you guys want to focus on so that I can tailor this to you, the audience, because that's all that matters. Some of you may have noticed that that first three lectures actually follows P cubed. One was the message. That's what we're talking about today. Next one's going to be the media, which is slideology. And number three is going to be the delivery. But I really want to know what you guys want. So to summarize before we go to Q&A, clarify your intent prior to starting lecture prep, not after. Inspire the learner as instead of thinking that you're going to completely educate them in 1/2 hour session. Watch out for those doomed lecture styles so that you're keeping them engaged and having a dynamic presentation. Tailor it to the audience needs, not towards what the speaker wants. And then get your foot in the door and start double dipping so you can get credit for your hard work as an educator. And now, as I close every lecture and questions, and I would recommend that you actually consider giving a donation to GiveWell. It's one of my favorite professional activities is giving a part of my salary to them. And if you have any questions about that, how to lecture, or really anything in the world you want to chat about, shoot me an email at dmccallum@augusta.edu. With that, let me turn it over to you guys for some questions. Nothing?
I'm driving in a car and listening, so I'm struggling with the media. But this was an excellent lecture. I'm so grateful for the opportunity and that Josh communicated it to all of us. So thanks. It's really lovely to kind of put a face to the name.
Of course. I'm really happy that you guys are uh, so engaged. I love that we've got some educational brethren up in Northeast Georgia. And honestly, like their involvement in GCEP has been fantastic. So I love that. Let's see here. So got a lot of great emails in there, which is fantastic. Keep those coming so that I can make sure that you guys specifically get an email. Sometimes things get filtered, through other people, and so I really would love to make sure that you guys are specifically included as opposed to washing through someone else when we do that database. Someone asked what GiveWell is. GiveWell is a charity group that basically finds the most effective ways to help the world. And so basically, it's a altruistic effort where I basically do one shift a month that is what I jokingly call for the kids. And so that goes towards things like malaria nets and vitamins for people in developing countries and things like that. It's actually been a huge solution to my burnout issues because, no matter what's going on in the department, if you think of like, yeah, I'm going to barrel through the next 9 hours, but gonna be actually helping some villagers or something like that. It actually is just a huge like breath of fresh air. It reminds me a lot of the medical missions work that I've tried in the past, except for I don't necessarily have to travel away from my family to do it. If you have more questions about GiveWell, I'm happy to nerd out as long as you want about that. Um, and then Daniel, you also asked, how do you deal with stage fright? So part of it is acceptance. I'm actually terrified in front of audiences, and it happens every time. I've given tons and tons of lectures, but every single time I've got some nerves. A little bit of that is exposure. The more times that you do it, the more you get kind of comfortable. And eventually, like the feedback that you get from your lectures kind of helps overcome it a little bit, but it never really goes away. It reminds me a little bit of imposter syndrome, where like residents will say, oh man, I feel like someone's going to find out that I shouldn't be doing this and that I'm an imposter. And I have to admit to them, I was like, yeah, even though I've been attending for over a decade, I still have some imposter syndrome. I recognize it, I'm more aware of it. So it impacts me a little bit less than when I was just a year or two after residency, but it's not ever going to completely go away. If you have a lot of autonomic dysfunction related to stage fright, like if you're actually like truly getting tachycardic and your heart is racing and things like that, some people have recommended things like beta blockers if you just have a really strong like physiologic response to it. I myself don't have as much of that. And it's more psychological of like, hey, is this gonna land flat? I truly thought when I logged in today that I might only have one person show up to the Zoom call or something like that. I would have done all this work for not much. So there's a lot of self-doubt that's there, and just learning to correct that mentally is probably the first step. But then also translating that stage fright into excitement. The difference between a negative experience and like a fun roller coaster ride is kind of one of a question of safety. So the more that you sort of get comfortable with the fact that, yeah, I'm a little amped right now, like I'm a little over the top, and I'm translating that stage fright into energy on the stage, that can actually leverage it as opposed to it just being a deficit of I'm obviously being nervous. But it definitely helped me a lot by just spending hours and hours talking to interns, by giving lectures, that exposure really probably neutralized my stage fright more than anything else. So great question. Anyone else?
Nice. Thanks for that answer. Do you have any, and you might get into this when you're doing your more slideology stuff, but we were talking before, I'm one of the ultrasound guys. So do you have anything in terms of resources specific to ultrasound that you might know of?
So as far as like
Since
the
it
the
is such a
style
media,
of
yeah,
lecture,
since it is such a media heavy um, topic generally, like, do you have any resources for how to make such a heavy media heavy modality like streamlined or nice or
yeah.
approachable?
So one of the great things about ultrasound is there's so many like websites and online resources that frankly weren't there 20 years ago. Depending on when you learned ultrasound, you might be kind of jealous of all the cool stuff that's out there now. So I think that actually being able to leverage some of those other resources like the emergency jail podcasts and things like that, a lot of those are really, really great to be able to use. One of the biggest failures that I run into with ultrasound heavy podcasts can be the absence of narrative or vignette, because it can be very easy to fall into the habit. It's fairly straightforward how to construct, okay, here's 50 clips of ultrasound, and then we'll just talk about them one after the other. That's kind of easy from like a lecture design concept, but it's not actually all that great from a narrative standpoint because usually we're talking about clinical ultrasound. So, like, how do you marry this to what you've got? So, making sure that you inject lots and lots of brief vignettes into it can kind of keep them engaged a lot more than just here's 20 random images of gallbladder with no clinical context. That's a lot less useful. But I think that there's enough things out there between, was it 60 or 60-second sono and things like that that are out there to where utilizing those as resources will diminish a little bit of you having to show every single clip that you want to talk about as much as introduce the topic. And then if it's the, you know, NYSORA, regional anesthesia discussions, those kind of resources can actually help them apply it at the bedside. Because I think that just-in-time training piece is really, really critical for ultrasound. If you're about to do a nerve block that you do twice a year, you probably need a resource to guide you on how to do that, as opposed to even if I've done it before, I'm not going to just try to remember how to do a fin block. I'm going to at least take a quick peek. Does that kind of answer your question, Daniel?
Yeah, definitely.
But we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more when we do the slideology lecture. But that heavy narrative component, I think, can really pull people along, even if they haven't fully drank the Kool-Aid of ultrasound. You can say, "Hey, all right, I hear that you've got doubts about the efficiency, but let me show you how this would completely change the speed that you can dispo a CHF patient with 45 seconds of probe to chest, like dispo obtained." Like that kind of thing can really help send that message along.
Oh man, I'm going to use that verbatim for all of my group members that are on this talk right now.
What other questions we got? Oh, game style questions. That's great. So, one of the big enemies of just like I've got the knowledge and let me just throw it down on a slide is getting engagement. I love Kahoot. I've seen some very good lecture style given with like Jeopardy, and there's some PowerPoint templates that are out there that can actually do Jeopardy style. The one hesitation I have to doing Jeopardy as opposed to Kahoot would be that you actually have a lot of time wasted of people choosing which column and like, okay, I want to do acid base for 400, Alex. Like that can take a lot of extra time. So that's why I like Kahoot style things. There are other software platforms, or if you're investing in it for the residency, there are some really cool like buzzers that you can spend $100 or something like that on Amazon and get like little buzzers that they can buzz in at a table. There's something visceral about that that really works well in a small group setting. But if I'm lecturing where the people answering the questions are more than like four or five, I haven't found anything better than Kahoot. It just for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a quiz software. It has multiple choice questions as the baseline, but then the longer you wait to answer, the fewer points you get. So there's like a leaderboard. It's basically automatic engagement. And so I'm a huge fan of that. You can actually get pretty far with a free Kahoot page, and that's fine. But there are other companies that make similar software. And a related concept that's not strictly game style, but sometimes dividing an audience into pro and con, if you have like a controversial statement of like, hey, do you think thrombolytics should be given up to 4.5 hours in ischemic stroke? If you divide your audience into two groups or something like that, that automatically makes it a little bit more of a game by like, throwing points at each and sort of discussing it. That makes it a little bit more dynamic. You're almost making your audience the debate participants, as it were. Any other questions?